You wake up in a room that feels very familiar, yet unrecognizable. Around you displays a decrepit environment that is decayed to its core, plaguing everything in the room around you. Confused and taken aback, you can't help but be bewildered and frightened of the horror that surrounds you, as if you fell asleep for over a century and awoke into a different place in time. Slowly walking down the hall of the apartment, you find more of this deceased environment that has consumed the room you thought you once knew and corrupted it with its own liking. A manifestation of a dying body that inhabits a corpse that is trying to compensate for some sort of life it has left as it deteriorates over time. Covered from the floor to the ceiling is nothing but blood and rust, as you soak in what you cannot possibly fathom of the room you once felt safe in, the room you once felt secure in, only begins to corrupt that wholesome feeling into something much darker, something much more sinister. As you watch the room around slowly collapse, you too find yourself breaking down and becoming one with the room. The opening of Silent Hill 4 cements such an otherworldly experience that only made me become more allured and compelled by such a presentation like this. From what I thought I once knew from the previous entries, all of that is thrown out the window and brings about a change, something entirely new to the player, one that I wasn't expecting, but one that grabbed my attention immediately. Furthermore, this room becomes enticing to the player as we switch to our main protagonist, Henry Townshend, your average everyday man who happened to move into the apartment of room 302 to start a new life, a new beginning, but that would only change by one fateful day. As Henry wakes up from his dream, we find ourselves in a new perspective, one that has never been done in any previous entry of the Silent Hill games before this one. It is first person. My attention was captured by this sudden, unannounced change in camera angle that gives a new feeling of dread to those who thought they were once prepared from playing the other games, to feeling out of touch with what they thought they once knew. As we look around the apartment, the player can interact with practically almost everything, from the pictures displayed on the wall, the kitchen where you can open the fridge to resupply yourself a drink, to the living room where you can look outside the window. It allows you to see the city of Ashfield full of life. Such mundane things may not seem worthwhile, but bring a story that is worth telling. However, the simple interaction, which is nothing more but attention to detail, comes to a halt, with the front door wrapped in chains that prevent anyone from getting in or anyone getting out, reminding the player that what we once thought was safe and sound is nothing but a prison that enslaves us, only allowing us to look outside through the peephole into the corridor of the outside to our fellow apartment neighbors who think nothing of the sort, going about their normal day when it is far from that. As we progress further throughout the apartment with our investigation, it becomes abundantly clear that the apartment will not let us out. Henry is trapped inside with no one but himself to help him out of this terrifying situation that is unexplainable. However, as we check the bathroom, we find a mysterious hole that was carved and engraved into a large circle that lays on the wall. With no other explanation or signs of revealing itself, we realize we don't have much other options but this alarmingly bewildering hole that seems like our only option of escaping, and hopefully finding a way out on the other side. As Henry climbs in, he slowly crawls while the screen becomes full of static that obscures our vision, building this tension. On the other side is only a new world that is unfamiliar to us, one that only raises more questions than gives us a concrete answer. As Henry roams through the liminal subway corridors, he meets Cynthia. Another fellow victim believes that what she is experiencing is only but a dream, and if true, it's a dream that they both grow tired of and want to desperately wake up from. As Cynthia disappears, this dream only becomes a nightmare, as the snipper head reveals itself as it becomes hostile once in Henry's sight. With the monsters becoming rampant, Henry retreats back to the restroom to find a similar looking hole that is, if not the same one he discovered in the bathroom of his apartment. With no other option, Henry once again dives into the hole, only to wake up once again in his bedroom. This gives the player an idea of the general gameplay mechanics of how Silent Hill 4 functions. Room 302 acts as a safe room, It allows the player a moment to breathe and reconcile with themselves to grab whatever belongings they need, look around, and interact with the environment to discover anything that is different, and traverse through the different worlds via the whole, from the apartment to the ones seen throughout the story, which, if it wasn't clear enough, will be what I'll be focusing on when it comes to understanding how this very room creates this unsettling atmosphere, and is what makes Silent Hill 4 so horrifying. If we take a moment to look back at the introduction, where we see room 302 covered in a decayed state that is horrid and manifests this malicious hostile environment, it becomes alarmingly clear to the player that this room is inhabitable and anything but safe. To expand upon this, the haunted figure that attacks the player is a dead giveaway, suggesting that there is paranormal activity to be found here. This becomes apparent as you play throughout the story to find the different various worlds that encapsulate these different paranormal and haunting figures that are out for bloodlust and making sure that you are dead. With this in mind, we can infer that this comprises most of the enemy roster, along with the different monsters you would typically find in any Silent Hill game. This is supposed to not only give the player an idea as to what they should expect later on in the game, but also create this subversion expectations. This geniusly orchestrates a room that becomes habitable once you step into the role of Henry. Once you get to play as him, you get to know a little more about him. You find out that most of the pictures framed on the walls of his apartment are photographs taken by him. He gives insight about his previous pursuits and different locations he's been to, and was fascinated by the spectacle, where he gives commentary, reflecting much of his personality. Not only that, but we find a storage box that is typical and rather a common staple in most survival horror games to store away any precious and valuable items. It seemingly sounds mundane in the grand scheme of things, but the reality is that the game wants you to get comfortable in Henry's point of view. These interactions that we see Henry have with Room 302 are much of an insight and reflection to us when we interact with our personal belongings that feel real and relatable. It's a very missable detail that may not make you think about it because, over time, the more you visit the room, the more it becomes safe and sound to you. It's even more evident when you take an immense amount of damage from enemies while in the other worlds you visit in order to progress, to where you come to find that your only means of replenishing your health is by revisiting your apartment. However, while we become comfortable once again after playing for a while, the cracks once again start to show that this room is anything but safe and sound, but rather intent on revealing itself for what it truly is, as we become more acquainted with it as time passes. After returning from the subway world, we come to find that the room will usually give Henry a message in some unique way, whether that is a letter he receives under his front door, looking out the window to see someone or something from the outside giving clues, or a change in the environment like the cracks in the wall that allow Henry to peep on Eileen, which is understandably creepy and questionable from an outsider's perspective. However, this is one that is fueled with care to ensure that his neighbor is safe. There is an importance here when it comes to holes in Silent Hill 4. This is a recurring trend that happens several times throughout the game, with such a notable example being when Henry visits the water prison world. This prison is home to one that is of the prisoners that are kept in cells that are located on the 3 floors, with nothing but a small enclosed room that shows a different story that gives a gray and dark implication that something disturbing happened here. It becomes more apparent when you uncover more documents and files while roaming around the prison to come and find recounts of the prison guards' notes of the children that were held captive here from the Silent Hill Wish House orphanage, indoctrinated against their will by a cult, the Order, as a means to convert them to their own religious practices, and if they retaliated, they would be sent to the water prison to be more likely tortured, abused, and suffer horrible practices that is inhumane. What cements this is the various peepholes you find in the guards' commons on each floor, having the ability to look through each one that sees everything. One can see this recurring theme of observing one without their attention as an invasion of privacy that violates one's right to their own personal space. An idea that is realized here, it becomes corrupted the more you sink into the game. This is only emphasized by Henry spying on Eileen. Of course, this is subjective as to how the player could interpret such a concept, one out of protection, or something more sinister. But regardless of the moral implication, I couldn't help myself but feel dirty and disgusted with myself, even if we were in the right. There was something so unsettling and weird about spying on someone without them noticing, that it felt very menacing and had malicious intent behind it. I don't know if that was the intended approach here that Team Silent had in regard to these sections where we had to spy on Eileen, but it does a phenomenal job in subverting one's own philosophy of what is wrong or right. To add on to this can be reflected back to Henry. This observation is projected back to him when you discover one of the most prolific and notable sites that are undeniably memorable in Silent Hill 4, Eileen's head. It's a sight that is out of nowhere, and much of a surprise to the player as they look through the many doors of the hospital world. Seeing Eileen's head just looking at you is nothing but horrifying. A spectacle to behold, as it's supposed to be projecting that observation we have been making to Eileen to be projected right back at Henry, to give that fear of being watched without our attention, to give us that feeling of what it's like to be violated. Upon many of these aforementioned visits back to room 302, one can get this feeling of loneliness, this isolation that is brought upon ourselves, yet with no understanding as to how or why this happened. It's clear that we are subjected to imprisonment to our own home. A home is one that's supposed to be familiar in its appearance, yet the atmosphere changes to a more unsettling one.
What? The cord's cut.
A safe place where we can come home from a 9-to-5 shift, exhausted beyond the brink of collapsing, and wanting to find that comfort and solace in our own home. But that home we once found fondness in is nothing but a lie. This, in a way, speaks to me on a personal level. As someone who works primarily in his room, I find this comfort in not only a place to rest, but a place to work, talk, and be myself. To see that innocence corrupted and constrained to something that is unfamiliar from what I previously grew to find safety in truly terrifies me. Unable to escape, and to only be confined to a room that all that you thought you once previously knew to be anything but a figment of your imagination, and far more something unsettling, is deeply agonizing and painful to fathom. And yet, the more I find this concept to be unsettling, disturbing even, it's one that compels me to be more allured into the horror that is what personifies much of Silent Hill 4. To see Henry look out of his apartment peephole into the hallway to see those trying to find out why he is absent and find him screaming, pleading for someone to hear him and desperately help him escape, only solidifies this. Looking out the window to find the world moves without him, as if nothing has changed. His world stops moving, and time is devoid of any meaning. Getting notes from a mysterious figure that you don't stop receiving and have no clue or any indication as to who or what this person is when they are watching you, without you knowing who they are. It's beyond our comprehension. It's these little intricate details in the storytelling that are written in room 302 that make me so fascinated by how complex it is in its layers that make the horror worthwhile. There is so much to be scrutinized in Silent Hill 4 that only makes me wish that I played this game earlier on, because it is, while divisive and even considered the black sheep in the franchise, is an experience that is more distinguishable than any other Silent Hill game that I played thus far. If it has one thing going for it, it's the horror that differentiates itself to be its own self-contained story, that is notable in what it tries to accomplish with its themes, atmosphere, and design. A sentiment that still has people to this day talking about it, and for many more years to come. Thank you for watching, have a great day, stay safe, and goodbye.